afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our next session. This session is called Untying the Double Bind, Lessons for Boards and Women CEOs. Our moderator is HETTY Pai, member of the board and CEO advisory partners at Russell Reynolds Associates. Please welcome Ms. Pai and our esteemed speakers.
Thanks very much. I don't think I've been Miss Pai ever, so I'll take that. I'm going to actually quickly hand over to my colleague Emma, who's going to do some quick round of introductions for us.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Emma Coombe. I'm a leadership advisor in Russell Reynolds Associates London office. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our discussion on untying the double bind, lessons for board women and CEOs. Today's conversation is seeking to tackle one of the most persistent and misunderstood dynamics in modern leadership, the contradictory expectations placed on women at the top. The double bind describes the impossible standard women leaders face: be confident, but not arrogant, decisive, but not domineering, warm, but not weak. As one CEO I know put it, you're expected to walk the tightrope and smile while you do it. But this isn't just anecdotal. To validate what women leaders have been saying behind closed doors for years, we analysed media coverage of 750 CEOs across the FTSE 100, S&P 500 and Euronext 100. We used the media as a proxy for societal views and norms, making it a useful indicator of broader leadership perceptions. And the data was stunning. Women CEOs were twice as likely to be described as both too ambitious and not ambitious enough, and 3 times more likely to be labelled lacking confidence. Author Marianne Sieghart calls this the authority gap, the measurable tendency to grant men automatic authority and make women earn it again and again. You see it in headlines, in boardrooms, and even in feedback. The data tells us that women CEOs are delivering. In fact, in these unpredictable times, in many ways, women are better suited to do this and to face the challenges. So I'll now pass over to our panel. We have a range of colleagues with us and a very esteemed guest. We've got Anna Borg, the CEO of Vattenfall. Thank you so much for joining us. Vattenfall is a European energy business, and Anna has led the company's bold pivot to enable fossil freedom across Europe, including landmark investments in nuclear, hydropower, offshore wind, onshore wind and solar, serving 11 million customers across 9 markets. I've got my colleagues Margot McShane and HETTY Pai, who co-founded the Artemis movement that we'll be talking about this afternoon. And I will now hand over to Laura Sanderson, who leads our EMEA business, who is joined by Francesco Vanni, sorry, I'm going to pronounce this wrong properly, apologies. Francesco Vanni Caracci, Chair of the Board of Directors of Euroclear. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. Francesco, as Chair of Euroclear, you were responsible for running a CEO appointment process that resulted in the appointment of Valérie Urbain, who is one of our relatively few number of female CEOs. And those listening this afternoon, those with us this afternoon, if Euroclear seems familiar to you, cast your mind back to before Christmas and the difficult discussions that were going on about the custody of the Russian sovereign wealth fund assets. Those are in Euroclear's hands. So Valérie is a CEO who has been delivering in quite extraordinary circumstances. Francesco, if you cast your mind back to the CEO succession and appointment process, what went right? What do you think the board did really well?
We found the right partner. Russell Reynolds. And we got lucky, because Valérie is really a transformational leader. And so the lessons for me is that it's never too early to start a process to map those high potentials, you know, and it's gender neutral, the comment. I understand minority, I'm the only Italian in the room probably, and I'm certainly one of 3 males in the room. But I think most companies at the base of the pyramid from a talent and human capital point of view are 50-50. 40, 60, 60, 40. But, you know, there is a lot of gender diversity. But that's get lost really at the top. Let's say -1, -2 from the CEO. And so our objective has been to really identify the talent that we had in the organization and enable them to grow professionally so that they were better prepared, you know, when the change comes. And I say we got lucky because it was not very obvious that Valerie had everything it took to be the next CEO and a transformational CEO, which was we were looking for. And that's because she was hidden. And the previous CEO really did not how do you say, enable the board and her to shine so that the board had the confidence that that was the right person for the future. And the other lesson that I've learned is that, you know, normally we repeat the profile of the current CEO when we're looking for the next CEO. And actually, most of the board spend time thinking, what is the profile of the CEO 5 years from now? And that was like the standard we were looking for. And so that then created the search, the partnership. Everybody was very clear what we were looking for. And obviously, it's always a win when the company can go inside. And as Lara knows very well, we almost went outside, but we got lucky because we couldn't get the person that we had identified from outside. And I'm very glad we got lucky because Valerie is really the right CEO for the company for the next several years. So what we're doing together with the help of Russell and Reynolds, first, the board and Valerie have worked very closely together to not only prepare her for her new role, but also to make sure that the board and her did a lot of work together to align priorities, to make sure that everybody understood and reconfirm our purpose, our vision, and also the strategy. So that when she was on the job day one, it was like the alignment exercise had already happened, and that enabled the company to survive a very difficult period because we were really not on the radar screen of anybody until the European Union and the Commission decided that they wanted to come after our balance sheet. And, you know, that was almost a near-death experience for the company. And I have to say, Valerie, she was only a year in the job, did an extraordinary work with her entire team. The second lesson is that the combination of diversity at the executive level really works. So she promoted several insiders, people, again, that were hidden in the organizational trenches, but also she had the courage to go outside and hire some exceptional talent from the market. And that diversity of views is really what enables this executive team to do what the board wanted, is to accelerate progress for our clients and our shareholders. I don't know if I've answered your question, but those are the lessons that I took.
Francesco, that's fantastic. Thank you. And in the rest of our discussion this afternoon, you're going to be hearing a little bit more about the kind of approaches we can take to help women like Valerie develop to be ready to undertake the CEO role, the approaches we took with Valerie and the approaches we're now taking with a number of others. Francesco, thank you. I know you have to be somewhere else, so we will, instead of closing remarks, you got opening remarks. So Francesco will...
Laura always puts me on the spot. So I was not prepared, but I think I leave you with a fantastic panel, and I'm sure you're going to learn, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time you'll do it a room full of Italians.
Of course. We'll fix our diversity problem. TANUJ.
So TANUJ, delighted that you've made it. In true Davos style, I did explain to some of my colleagues, just expect the unexpected when it comes to Davos, and that's certainly on our timings. But brilliant, thank you. Hot-footed it up
I wish
here.
I could say I've skied down the mountains to be here, but almost felt like that. But apologies for being late.
Well, we're going to pick into the agenda as well, get further into it. We've heard about some lucky circumstances, as Francesco called them, as some really good examples. We're also going to dig into that is real life, but also some more specifics around how we can change more life. And TANUJ, just to give a sense of her, so she's spent her life within big financial services institutions. She's currently one of the senior executives in Standard Chartered, where she has, amongst other things, responsibility for people, strategy, transformation. She's also sat on the board of a FTSE 100 retailer for multiple years as well. So looks at things from a slightly different angle, and we thought it would be an interesting combination. So if I think to then what we've been starting to hear about in the conversation of Francesco's opening sort of lived experience remarks. So today, what we wanted to look at, just dig in further into, is some big calls. So we talked about that ambition, confidence, double bind that Emma referred to. So some big calls that you've made career-wise, which we're going to dig into. We're going to look at some data and understand what's underneath the metrics. We're then going to say, what's that actually telling us? And then we're going to get to the so what. So you will find in Artemis, the whole point of it is there's a so what. So what can we do? And we leave here with ideas of action rather than potentially interesting quandaries that we feel we can't solve. So, Anna, I'm going to turn to you, and thank you so much for sitting there patiently after, obviously, the fun and games of Davos in this rather hot room. So thank you. I'd like to get on to those big calls. So you've made them, Emma referred to it, in the context of big strategic calls for your business. If you reflect on what you've heard there around that media coverage, as well as thinking about your investors, the external world. So let's start there. Did you find that you had to lead differently as a woman? Did you find that you tempered your message? Did it have any implications for you?
I don't think that I sort of tailored my way of leading because I'm a woman, because I am a woman. And I think that leadership needs to be authentic.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's not good leadership. So I think you can never sort of think about your leadership in an outside-in view like that. What you have to do is be aware of how you are perceived,
Yep.
and maybe also some of the situations that you described earlier, and really sort of distinguish them between which ones do I want to be more visible in or less visible
Yep.
in. And I think that whenever I make a decision, or especially if we're going to do a big shift or a big investment,
Yep.
like you put forward as an example, I think there are three components that are important to me, not because I'm a woman, but because they are important.
Yep.
And the first one is context, to really show the context and the market environment that this is happening in. The second one is the business logic, and the third one is showing the numbers.
Yep.
And I think depending a bit on who my audience is, and if I think that they are more or less focused on, different traits of your personality, including your gender, I might lean more or less on one of them,
Okay.
in order to really create the understanding I need, or the entry point I need
Yep.
for the conversation. But my experience is that there are usually sort of two groups that you meet, and one of them is thankfully the most common one in my business environment, and that's the people that don't really make a difference and don't care if you are a man or a woman. They judge you by what you're doing,
Yeah.
but still being aware of the fact that in the world around you there are some conscious or unconscious signals that you will have to relate to as a woman. And those are the ones you want to work with, by the way. So if you don't have enough people like that around you, you should probably look for somewhere else to work, I would say, because that is what will determine your ability to really display your competence and the way you're working in the end. The other group are the ones where they usually do take the starting point and assume that some of the examples that you highlighted are what's happening, that you are in a certain way because you are a female
Yep.
CEO. And I mean, we are all a lot of things. I'm Swedish. I'm 54. I'm 164, tall or short, whatever.
I'd say
I'm
very
a woman,
tall.
so I'm a lot of things. So it's not possible to sort of just look at one character.
Yeah.
But when you do feel that you have people around you take that sort of entry point, then you need to try and sort of square the conversation differently. And you should not surround yourself with people like that too often. You cannot always choose, I know that, but to a large extent you actually can. Because they are the ones who will ask you the quite strange questions. So like, what does it feel like to be a female CEO?
Yes.
Well, you know, what am I supposed to answer? I am a female and I am a CEO. To me, the combination feels perfectly natural. So it's a very strange topic in my mind.
Yes.
And I think that's also when you get some of the maybe more strange responses sometimes to you. So, but basically you need to be authentic, and then you need to be aware of the world around you and decide a bit what you lean on most in order to get impact there and then.
I really like that. That's a really spoken. I've started to turn Artemis into an adjective. It's very Artemisian, if I could say of you, because it is both looking for the good, it's looking for the positive, but at the same time being realistic. So trying to create some change on that. I'm conscious that we're going to need to move a little bit through our gears here, Margot, but perhaps therefore just a brief synopsis. We've been talking a lot about this Artemis movement, this thing. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and how that relates to the topics? And then I'd really like to get on to TANUJ.
Yes, I'll do it quickly. That's my cue. Is this, I don't know if you can hear this. Thanks. So Artemis was created to modernize how we define and develop best-in-class CEO talent. At the heart of it, it's really never been harder to be a CEO. The reality is our clients want more people to be prepared for it. They're generally underutilizing half the population, which is women. And so we do three things with our clients. Number one, we help them identify more options, specifically overlooked and unexpected options. Number two, we work with them to put a finer point on looking forward. What is that CEO success profile of the future? Because looking in the rearview mirror has a lot of trappings to it, not the least of which is you're looking for the exact archetype of what you have right now. And then the third bit is we work with those women with CEO aspirations on really hardcore development to equip them with the skills, including things like resilience, getting clarity of their authentic purpose, to your point. And then thirdly, really having the confidence to take the job truly as it is. We call it a movement because this is not about having women, or for that matter, men, fit into an old archetype. It's really about helping organizations with data and insight look forward and make change around how they decide who should be leading. So to the point about the double bind, maybe I want to keep it going here. Just what women will say is privately, and by the way, it's different, let's say if you have women networking group with boards, when women who want to be a CEO all get in a room together, they really reveal to you how exhausting it is, especially if they're very far along, because they are held to this double standard. One group says they don't have enough gravitas. Another group says they're not ambitious enough. And they're constantly recalibrating. Number one, it discourages other women. It's also depleting them of energy that they put elsewhere. And they're having developed this skill set, which they do. They do it in a positive way, but something we're trying to raise awareness of, so more people understand and see them on the way up and give them support.
Sorry, Anna. We're playing a little bit of microphone tag here. TANUJ, I'd really like to get into your wise words on this. You know, you have responsibility in no small part in your organisation and hitherto in others as well for that talent agenda. What are you recognising from this? What we're talking about, this double bind piece. What have you seen work, not work? What's your words of wisdom here?
Well, I'm not sure I have words of wisdom. I loved what Anna said about wanting to be authentic, but in what she also said was sometimes in your endeavor to be truly authentic, don't be blinded to the fact that you have spikes, which would require a bit of development or being sensitive to how you show up in front of different people. And I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think you can be authentic to yourself, but be very conscious that in that authenticity, there is a danger that you can inadvertently alienate or play to a particular stereotype. And the smart thing is being sensitive to it and trying to work around it. So, I'll just put it out. Do I believe they are different sort of standards? I do think they are preconceived notions in the way women lead versus men lead. And you and I spoke about this, HETTY, a little bit. They are preconceived notions. So it's assumed that women lead, much more from empathy, nurturing, care. By the way, all very great things. And because they lead like that, it kind of assumes that they are less decisive, less risk-taking. And that's wrong, as we know, having worked with multiple female leaders. And sometimes you do need to call that out in a much more data-driven, in a much more fact sort of based way. But I do think those stereotypes exist, and the standards are a bit different.
And I wonder then, actually, that's a rather nice segue, just jumping, Margot, a little long here, just thinking about what we've learnt from our Artemis programme in terms of those stereotypes, but also some things that we're helping women, perhaps they're helping us with the insights around how they might equip themselves a little differently going forward. So I'm thinking now about the effortless aspects of leadership life that we've talked about, for example.
Well, they say they share easily. No, but honestly, we've been able to gather a lot of anecdotal evidence that seems quite consistent. A lot of women, people are told about the barriers of development. We like to also say amplify what's already coming effortlessly too. So things like having purpose, collaboration, working across stakeholders, doing hard things that no one else wants to do. These are some of the things women say, hey, that's easy for me. But if you actually look at the data, because we like to put as much actually hardcore quantitative data behind this, we actually have done a global study to look at how direct reports to leaders perceive their male leaders versus female leaders. And the reality is there are really minimal differences, except for there's actually one thing that women spike on, which is coaching and development, which is interesting. So these are the direct reports to people. That is pretty sobering. I'm just going to combine it with another point. The other point on performance, this is interesting. I'm not sure, I became aware of a thing called the Hypatia Women CEO Index. It's basically an index fund which highlights and tracks the performance of women who are leading publicly traded companies compared to their category peers. And since its inception in 2022, they have consistently outperformed. And of course, these women change because that's a criteria. But I think that's quite instructive and might surprise people. Yeah. And people said, why is that? And of course, we just have hypotheses that we're trying to actually ground. But we think part of it is the women who get to the top had a harder road to get there, so they're pretty darn good. It also could be there's something about how they're leading that's particularly impactful.
And actually, that's straight on to you, Anna, right? I'd love to hear your responses to what Margot just said.
No, I think that resonates very well, and I really like measurable performance. Because if you're in a sort of, and I would urge anyone who would want sort of a senior leadership position to take on a P&L responsibility or a result that is measurable early on, because that is very impactful, and it's less open for interpretation than if you have a job where you deliver something that someone is supposed to judge whether it's good or not. And of course, it's not just the numbers that count. It's also about how you put the numbers there in the end and how you run the business. But numbers are numbers, and it's quite sort of visible whether you are performing or not then. And I think that is something I really would urge for.
And if we then get onto something we started to talk about, you mentioned the word measurement, Tanuj, a bit earlier. What's your view on that word, on the utilisation of it? It means many different things, but what's been your experience of what's been most valuable in that context?
Well, I mean, trying to get what we have trying to do within Standard Chartered, and what I've tried to do is in all of the talent assessments, how do you work very hard to remove some of those biases? Yep. And actually the way you do it is by getting into measurable traits of performance. Financial performance is definitely one of them. But what do your teams say? What is your ability to be able to attract best-in-class talent? What is your ability to be able to retain best-in-class talent? How do you think of a broad stakeholder group as evidenced by feedback from customers, employees, etc. So in the assessment processes, how do you get this multi-dimensional view, all of which I believe is measurable, right? So, we talk about balanced scorecard, 4 quadrants for a reason, and there's loads of evidence that exists in companies. But I don't think companies do a really good job of surfacing it in a digestible way that can lead to meaningful conversations around data and evidence, as opposed to perceptions and experiences. Mm-hmm. And I think that requires effort. It requires effort in companies, and it requires efforts in boardrooms to be able to make that shift.
And you just mentioned the boardroom, so you sit on the board of another FTSE 100 company. So how do you find the lens when you're sitting in that seat? How have you found that conversation? What's that mean if we're thinking about others that sit in boardrooms potentially as opposed to their executive lives? Any advice there around how you can get that conversation centred around the right kind of things?
I'm very fortunate because the board I sit on is a retail board. It's a big retail board in UK, and retail in UK has very, very successful senior women, which I have to admit has not been the case for the longest time in financial services. I would assume financial services has kind of been the most behind the curve. And I found the parallels between the two, or having that experience, hugely enlightening. And one of the reasons I believe there are so many women in retail, across big retailers in UK, is because of measurable performance, exactly what you have said, is because the boards and the CEOs have made a real effort to move people around, to build the skill gaps that they have. And again, that's a very evidence-based conversation, right? This is the way the person's performing, but these are the skill gap that exists, and how do we, in a concerted way, fill those skill gaps? And I found that experience sitting as a non-exec director and being able to have a very different lens on performance and a very different view of stakeholders that have a view on your performance. I found that quite interesting.
And Anna, you've grown up from trainee, I think, all the way through to CEO in your organisation. So you've got a lot of experience. As you say, it's obviously been an environment, at least most of the time, which you felt was supported, as you were suggesting. Otherwise, why stay there? But if you think across your career, what do you think's still true on some of these barriers we're talking about in perception? Potentially, I think we're realising over reality. And what are things you think now are starting to be disbanded? What's your experience there?
Well, I think that regardless of industry, and I've been in and out of the company, so I also did the detour in financial services, in fintech, for a number of years. But I think regardless of industry, of course there is a development. And I think we see that if you look in a more long-term perspective. If I just compare it to my mother or my grandmother, my reality looks different, and in that sense better from this perspective. But on the other hand, this is also something that is, changing fairly slow.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to go back to and remember, why are we talking about this? Why is this important? And why are we doing this in a business context? Because, of course, it's about, everybody's being, valued equally and having a fair chance. And I don't want to downplay that in any way, because it's sort of the ground rule. But I think it's also about performance. Because there is tons of research showing that mixed teams in different dimensions perform better. And that is what I'm looking for as a CEO when I look at, a diverse management team or a diverse workforce. I want performance, and I want the teams to perform better. I want the perspectives of all of my customers, all of my stakeholders, all of my investors to be around the table in order to make better decisions. And finally, I want to fish in the entire talent pool, not in only half of it. That's pure stupid.
Couldn't agree more. That is the founding premise of Artemis, in fact, is we...
Really remember why we're doing it, and that it drives business value. I think that's something we need to come back to over and over again.
I couldn't agree more. I'm conscious we're going to run out of road here, but because this conversation could roll. And I'm going to go to Margot in a minute to help us sort of sum up where we're getting to. I mentioned at the beginning, Artemis is all about the positive, right? It's all about what can we do, what next, what's it mean for me, what's it mean for my organisation, and you're just getting, I think, to some really interesting points. As a little anecdote, someone shared with me that if you printed out all the data that bears out the facts that you just said around better performing businesses are ones that have a range and diversity of view, it would fill multiple football pitches. So whatever sporting analogy you want to pick on, or another, it's a lot of data. So I think it's reasonably unequivocal, but reminding people of that rather than trying to potentially put it into a bit of a box. But knowing that we have to wrap, I really go back to you, Margot, to sum up for us. You've got so much CEO succession experience. You'll have seen a lot. What do you think, if you're going to leave some advice to this room and people listening, what genuinely is going to make a difference? What would you leave with them?
Yes, and to Hetty's point, we never want to ever come across as victims. It's all about recommendations, and we want people to leave the room saying, now I know what to do. So, I mean, there are three things. Were you going to say something? Okay. Three things is, one is encouraging the board of directors, who ultimately is making the decisions, who, as many of you know, is when you have longer multi-year succession projects, it's really the CEO and increasing the CHR who are really identifying and developing internally, but at some point it gets handed over in parallel path to the board. We know that if the more we make the development opportunities for her objective rather than subjective, the more granular, the more likely she is to deliver the outcome. I'll just give you a small example. I was speaking with a CEO last week, and he said, her biggest opportunity is she doesn't have gravitas. And I said, what exactly do you mean by gravitas? And we got to 2 or 3 things that made perfect sense, that is on a piece of paper that she can work towards. There'll be 360s, et cetera. So don't leave it in the vague. That's dangerous territory. The second thing is really, I think going the positive point, this is an opportunity. It is really hard to be a CEO right now. When you take a board through the exercise of not looking in the back, but saying, okay, let's think 3 years from now, 5 years from now, what needs to be true about this person? It opens up the aperture and also makes room for other people in that process, which is a really encouraging thing. By the way, it also gets them galvanized and moving in a different direction. And I'd say the third thing is, no matter how great the CEO is that you place, the board is going to have to support her. They have to support a male as well. But sometimes people might not know her as well. We know that to be true. That often happens. They know the male candidates better. But also when the going gets tough, don't revert to stereotypes. We know that women are 2 times as likely to have activist pressure, for example. She will need the board support, and that is just as important as the selection process is ensuring they're taking off the bias and supporting her when she is in the job.
Thank you, Margot. I think if we're going to leave you just with a couple of reflections, knowing that we need to wrap, I think about, and I've described it as such before, I feel like in a land where today, there's a lot going on out there that's a bit complicated, and we're talking about things that are hard and are tough. The really good news about what we're talking about here is it's only imbued with hope and positivity, but not naivety. And what I mean by that is, Artemis, I think about it in the context of almost like a light. And once the light hits the corners that were dark before, they will remain light. And what I mean by that is exactly where Anna, TANUJ, Laura, Margot, and Francesco, and is here, we're all going on the same thing, which is, oh my gosh, there's this huge leadership opportunity that is massively under-leveraged today at the very time we need more leaders. And at the very time, as Margot was suggesting, and our evidence will tell you that actually some of the characteristics that we know women leaders particularly index hardest on, best on, are the very characteristics that are the ones that are required, most needed in today's modern progressive leader. Now, I'm very conscious we were going to have another person around our table today, and she's down here. So, BELEN, I see you're here. Sorry, Natasha's pointing over here, and I was thinking, BELEN, that looks like you to me. Welcome, and I'm so sorry for your delay, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you very much for having me, and really my biggest, the Swiss police didn't. Let's blame the Swiss police.
I think when in doubt.
So it was like an hour to pass the control, and like
you look remarkably unruffled.
4 hours to come from Zurich to Davos. So very, very sorry.
We're thrilled you made it. We have but a few minutes, but you have so much to share. So you've been listening to some of this conversation. You were aware of the topics before we came in. Be brilliant if you wouldn't mind being our summarizer in terms of your experience and what you want to share with the group.
Look, I think everything I heard in the last 5 minutes is absolutely right. I think, talking about the double blind, which was the topic of this session, I'm sure you had super interesting discussions on critical topics. My key message is that the best antidote for the double blind is authenticity. We really need to be who we are. Right, and over the years, I have been in the industry for more than 35 years at this time, and the best compliment I received, to be briefed, a few weeks ago when I was talking to someone that I haven't talked for at least 25 years. He told me, BELEN, you are exactly the same. You look exactly the same, and he of course was not referring to the way I look, because I age, but obviously,
if you say so,
obviously I state myself, right, and leading like yourself and not pretending to be is absolutely key. I think the other topic is that for the coming generations, we really need to reframe likability to impact, right? Because we spend too much time thinking on, what people are saying about us. And I see, you know, and the more confidence we gain over the years, the better place we are to lead big transformations. And this is something that we learn on the way. You express a positive, very positive conclusion with which I agree. I think we have made tons of progress in the way, but definitely not enough.
Oh, 100%.
Not enough, not enough. I mean, my own experience as a female CEO, when I was nominated the first female CEO ever in Germany, was not short from intimidating. Not short from intimidating, simply because, you know, I just couldn't believe that the female accompanying the CEO was that shocking to people, right? So I was absolutely determined to be a CEO, only a CEO, and act as a CEO, of course, with my female condition, my own style, and most importantly, my own personality. So look, we have to continue. We need to partner. We need to partner not only amongst ourselves, but also with other stakeholders who will be advocating for what is right, which is, you know, building diverse and inclusive organization, which is going to give us the right competitive advantage and will help us generate and create value.
Thank you, Belen. Well, you've said that with true authenticity. I'm so pleased indeed. None of us are saying we've finished yet. This is all a ray of sunshine, though, going forward to take it into a new dimension. Hopefully when, you know, our grandchildren, our children, it's their time. I hope that some of these conversations just don't need to exist.
Exactly. That would be great. That's the aspiration.
And I perhaps just the last thing to share as an anecdote, but it perhaps sums up all of this conversation in a way around you're all talking about this authenticity point, but with appropriate realism. And I think we all probably understand what that means, and an understanding of the ecosystem that you're in. A woman that I work with a lot, who's a CEO of another business, and she said in her early career, she led in spite of being a woman. And in her middle career, she led because she was a woman. And she just said, now I lead and I am a woman. I think that's not a bad place to finish. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for your race to get here. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much.